The radiator in the Milwaukee probate office clicked and rattled, like it had something to say, and Maren Whitfield sat very still while a stranger read out loud the shape of a life she thought she had shared. Her German shepherd would not settle. Tucker lay at her boots on the polished wood floor, front paws crossed, but his amber eyes kept moving, and twice he lifted his head toward the moing oak table as though he could smell something the rest of them could not. He was a large dog, black saddle across his back, tan legs, thick winter coat still coming in. He had insisted on coming that morning. Maren had not argued. After 50 years of knowing when to fight and when to let a thing be, she had learned that some battles were not worth the breath, and a dog at her feet was not one of them. She was 68 years old, a retired librarian, a widow of 12 days. Her hands rested in her lap, folded loosely, and they looked smaller than she remembered. Pale, the veins rising faintly beneath the skin, like the tracery of rivers on an old map. She had trimmed her silver hair that morning and pinned it back the way her husband always said made her look capable. Capable. She had held to that word like a railing all the way up 3 flights of stairs, because it was the only word she had brought with her that still felt like it belonged to her and not to him. Across the table sat Grady Vaughn, her stepson, in a navy suit that fit too snug across the shoulders. Clean shave, hair parted sharp to one side. He kept checking his phone and turning it face down again, as though the screen might accuse him of something. He did not look at her. Beside him, his younger sister, Sloane, dabbed at her eyes with a folded tissue, though the crying had stopped some time ago, and now it was mostly about appearances. She had known these two since they were teenagers, sullen and grieving the mother who came before her, and she had spent 2 decades trying to be something to them that was not a replacement and not a rival, and she had mostly failed, and she had made her peace with that failure the way a person makes peace with a knee that aches before rain. Today, watching Grady's thumb move across a screen he would not let anyone see, she understood that the piece had been a one-sided arrangement. At the head of the table, the attorney Warren Tate adjusted his glasses and opened a folder. The sound of paper sliding against paper was louder than it should have been. "Thank you all for coming," he said. His voice was calm, professional, practiced. Maren stared at the grain of the table. Maple veneer. She had spent a summer once cataloging furniture materials for a historical exhibit back when her days were full of small, useful knowledge, and she focused on the wood now, because it was easier than looking at the man who would not look at her. "I will now read the last will and testament of Hollis David Whitfield." Hollis, he had always introduced himself that way to strangers. Hollis, as if the full weight of it explained him. As if it carried a meaning she had spent 22 years trying to read, and had clearly she understood now, never finished. Tate moved through the formal language. Date of execution, witnesses, amendments. The traffic outside blurred into a steady hum. Tucker shifted just enough to let her know he was there. "To my son, Grady Vaughn, I leave the residential property located at," and Tate read the address of the house Maren had lived in for 22 years. She did not move, along with all furnishings and contents therein. Grady nodded once, not toward her, toward the table. "To my children, Grady Vaughn and Sloane Vaughn, I leave equal shares of my retirement accounts, investment portfolios, and remaining liquid assets." Sloane sniffed softly. Maren waited. She did not know what she was waiting for. A mention, a phrase. Something as simple as the words "to my wife." Tate turned the page. The sound was clean and final, and somewhere below on Wisconsin Avenue, a siren rose and faded. Specific personal items are distributed as follows: the grandfather's pocket watch to Grady, the framed lake painting from the hallway to Sloane, the antique fishing rods to Grady. Something tightened inside her chest. Not pain, not yet. Just pressure as though the air in the room had changed weight. The lake painting. It had hung in their hallway for 16 years, a small oil of a dock and dark water and a stand of pines, and she had dusted its frame 1,000 times and never once asked him where the place was. She had assumed it was nowhere. She had assumed it was a thing he liked because it was quiet. Her name had not been spoken. Not once. She looked at Grady. He still was not looking at her. Tate paused and adjusted his glasses again. "There is one final property," he said. "A secondary structure located in northern Minnesota." Grady's brow furrowed slightly. That was the first thing all morning that seemed to catch his attention, and she noticed it the way you notice a single bird lift off a wire before the rest of the flock. "To my wife, Maren Whitfield, I leave the cabin property at Alder Lake, Minnesota, along with any attached contents. The property is assessed as minimal market value." Minimal. The word hung in the warm air. Minimal. She blinked. A cabin. Hollis had mentioned it once years ago, an old place up north, and she had assumed it sold long before she ever met him. Minimal market value. The painting in the hallway came back to her, then the dock and the dark water and the slow, cold understanding moved under the surface of her thoughts without yet breaking through. Tucker stood, not abruptly, not alarmed. He simply rose and pressed his shoulder against her calf, and only then did she realize she was trembling. His weight steadied her the way a hand on a shoulder steadies a man on uneven ground. Tate continued with closing statements, but the words felt far away now. Legal formalities, signatures, copies to be mailed. The radiator hissed, then Grady finally looked up. "Well," he said quietly, "at least you'll have somewhere to go." Somewhere to go. She turned her head toward him. He smiled, not unkindly, not kindly either. Just neutral, as if this were a practical arrangement, as if the house she had filled with books and birthday dinners and 22 years of weather had never once been hers. Tucker's ears tilted forward. He looked at Grady for a long moment the way a dog looks at a thing it is deciding about, and then he looked back at her. "That concludes the reading," Tate said and closed the folder. Chairs scraped. Sloane stood first. Grady followed. Maren remained seated 1 second longer, holding the words the way you hold something hot before you understand you have to set it down. Erased from the will. A cabin in northern Minnesota. Minimal market value. Tucker nudged her hand with his nose. She rested her fingers in his fur. Warm, solid, real. Then she stood because standing was the only thing left to do. On the way out, she dropped her keys. It was nothing, a clumsiness of cold fingers, and she bent to pick them up beside the chair Grady had left. That was when she saw it under the edge of the seat, half slid beneath. A business card, cream stock, printed in a heavy, confident font. Royce Caldwell, Lakemont Resort Group. Below the name, a phrase she would remember later without trying to. Waterfront acquisition and development. She picked it up. She had no reason yet to think anything of it, only the librarian's reflex of returning a thing to its place. She turned to hand it across. Grady's hand closed over it before she finished the motion. Fast. Too fast. He took it without a word and slid it into his breast pocket, and for half a second his eyes met hers, and there was something there she had not expected to see at a funeral or a will reading. Not grief, not even greed, something closer to alarm. "Old paperwork," he said. She said nothing, but the alarm in his face stayed with her all the way down the courthouse steps into the damp metallic cold of late afternoon, the kind that seeps through wool and settles in the joints. Downtown Milwaukee moved around her in its restless evening way, heels clicking, engines revving, somebody laughing too loudly across the street. Life continuing at full volume. It felt obscene. Tucker walked close to her knee, not pulling, not lagging, just present. At the corner, she stopped to let a bus groan past, and a young woman with a stroller smiled at the dean, and Maren smiled back automatically. And the small, ordinary kindness of it nearly undid her in a way the will reading had not. She held herself together until the light changed. Then she crossed. She drove to the house one last time as the sky bruised toward purple. The porch light was already on. Grady's car sat in the drive too close to the garage, slightly crooked the way it always did. For 22 years, she had used that driveway. Tonight, she parked at the curb. The front door opened before she reached the steps. Grady stood there with his jacket zipped and his keys in his hand, as if he had been waiting. "I figured you'd come by," he said. "I need a few things." He stepped aside. Inside, the house smelled of lemon cleaner, and the photographs were already gone from the hallway wall. The small oak table by the stairs cleared of mail and clutter. The hallway where the lake painting had hung showed a pale rectangle on the wallpaper, brighter than the faded paper around it, the ghost of a thing that had been taken down already. It felt staged. It felt like a house that had finished with her. Her bookshelf still stood against the far wall, 3 decades of hardcovers carried home from a library career lined up in careful rows. She touched one spine, then another, the way you might touch the hands of people you are leaving. "I'll take what fits in the car," she said. "That's probably best." Tucker moved through the rooms with his nose low, taking the measure of what had changed. He paused at the kitchen doorway and looked toward the backyard, toward the grill, as if expecting Hollis to be standing there. When no one appeared, he came back to her side and sat against her leg, and she felt the small grief of it, that the dog still expected the man, and the man would not come, and that no one in this house but the two of them seemed to feel his absence as a loss rather than an opportunity. She packed 2 suitcases, sweaters, the heavy navy coat from her Chicago winters from before Hollis, from a life that had been entirely her own once, when she shelved returns at a branch library on the south side and ate her lunch alone on a cold bench and thought that was loneliness, not knowing what loneliness she would learn later in a full house. Sensible boots. From the bedroom, she took the small silver bracelet her mother had given her, leaving the expensive pieces that had apparently already been itemized by someone else. In the study, she filled a cardboard box with books, not all of them, only the ones with notes in the margins, the ones that felt like company. She rolled up Tucker's worn canvas bed and tucked it under her arm. Grady was waiting near the staircase when she came back through. "You really think you're going to stay up there?" he asked. She met his eyes for the first time since the office. "I'm going to see it. It's not insulated well. Dad mentioned that once, and it's isolated." "Isolated?" She almost smiled. "That won't be a problem." He shifted his weight uncomfortable in a way she had not seen before, as if her calm was harder to manage than her tears would have been. "If it doesn't work out, we can talk." "We." She adjusted the strap on her bag. "Take care of the house," she said quietly. "She deserves it." Then she stepped past him, out into the suburban dark that smelled of wet leaves and distant chimney smoke. She loaded the car, set the box of books behind the passenger seat, tucked Tucker's bed along the side. Tucker jumped in and sat upright, watching the lit windows of the house. She did not look back at Grady again. But as she pulled away, she saw him in the rearview mirror or standing in the doorway, with his phone already at his ear, talking to someone, his free hand moving the way a man's hand moves when he is making a promise he is not sure he can keep. Interstate 35 stretched north in long, steady lanes, the city lights thinning behind her, into clusters and then into nothing. The hum of tires settled into a rhythm. For the first hour, Tucker stayed upright in the back seat. He did not whine. He did not pace. He only watched, and now and then his eyes met hers in the rearview mirror, and each time she nodded slightly, as if to assure him she was still there, as if to assure herself. She had told no one she was leaving that night. There had not seemed much to say. The friends she and Hollis kept had been mostly his couples from the firm and the club, and in 12 days of casseroles and careful condolences, she had learned which of them had only ever been visiting her marriage, not her. Her thoughts kept drifting back to the office, to the sound of pages turning, to the simple absence where her name should have been. She tried to recall the last real conversation she and Hollis had about the future. It had been ordinary. Groceries, a leaking upstairs sink, whether to repaint the hallway. Nothing about revisions. Nothing about a separate cabin. Nothing about being written out. He had kissed her forehead that morning the way he did every morning and gone to an appointment he said was routine, and 3 weeks later, he was gone. And somewhere in the gap between the forehead and the funeral, a man she had slept beside for 2 decades had quietly arranged for her name to disappear. Around 9 o'clock, she pulled into a fuel station off the highway, a bright island in a sea of pines. She filled the tank with her collar turned up against the cold, and Tucker stood in the back seat watching the road behind them. Then he growled, low from the chest, a sound he almost never made. She followed his line of sight. A dark SUV had pulled in near the air pump and idled there with its headlights off. No one got out. The windows were tinted. It simply sat, engine running the way a thing waits when it is in no hurry, because it already knows where you are going. Easy, she said. Tucker did not ease. His ears stayed pinned forward, and a ridge of fur lifted along his spine, and Maren found herself moving a little faster than she meant to as she screwed the cap back on and climbed in. She locked the doors out of an instinct she had not used in years. When she pulled out, the SUV was still there, dark and patient, and then the on-ramp curved and she lost it in the night. She told herself it was nothing, a traveler resting, a man on his phone. But Tucker did not lie down for a long while after that, and a dog like Tucker did not growl at nothing, and she had learned over 8 years to trust his judgment of strangers over her own. Her phone buzzed in the cup holder near the Minnesota line. Sloan. She let it go to voicemail, then thought better of it, and called back at the next rest area with the engine running and the heater ticking. Maren. Sloan's voice was thin. In the background, a television murmured, I wanted to make sure you got off all right. I'm fine, I'm almost to the border. A pause stretched out, longer than a pause should. Maren waited the way she had learned to wait at a reference desk for the real question hiding behind the first one. There's something, Sloan started. About the cabin, about Grady, Never mind, it's late. You should rest. Sloan, whatever it is, you can say it. A breath came down the line, and for a moment Maren thought she would. Just be careful up there. Another pause. Some of it isn't what it looks like. And then she was gonna be dead, the words left hanging in the cold car-like breath. Maren sat there a long moment with the phone in her hand. Some of it isn't what it looks like. The girl had sounded frightened, and Sloan Vaughn was not a woman who frightened easily. She had watched that girl talk back to her father at 16, watched her stand in a hospital corridor, dry-eyed, while her brother fell apart. Whatever had put that tremor in her voice tonight was not grief. She drove on. The road narrowed after midnight, 2 lanes, then nearly 1 fewer streetlights, more forest. Twice a pair of headlights held steady in her mirror for longer than felt natural, and twice she told herself the highway was simply empty enough that anyone going her direction would seem to be following, and twice Tucker lifted his head and watched the glass until the lights turned off at some county road and were gone. When she finally pulled into a small roadside motel, the dashboard clock read 12:47. She killed the engine and sat in the silence. Real silence, the kind cities never allow. Tucker stood, stretched his front paws long, and shook himself once, as if shedding the entire day from his coat. She slept in stretches. Trucks passed on the highway. Somewhere a heater knocked. Tucker lay near the door with one ear angled toward the hall, guarding something that no longer existed, or perhaps something that did not exist yet. Once near 3 in the morning, he stood and went to the window and stood looking out at the parking lot for a long while, and Maren lay still and watched him and did not turn on the light, and after a few minutes he came back and lay down, and she did not get up to see what he had seen. By 8:30, they were back on the road, and the farther north they went, the more the world changed. The interstate gave way to a smaller highway, and that narrowed to a two-lane road edged with birch and long strips of marsh grass already gone brown. Pine branches leaned low over the asphalt. Frost still clung to the shaded ground. A wooden sign appeared past a bend, Alder Lake 18 miles. The air felt different here when she cracked the window. Cleaner, sharper. It carried the scent of damp leaves and something mineral underneath stone and cold water. They passed a gas station with two pumps, a bait shop with a faded mural of walleye along its side, a small white church with a gravel lot. Then the road curved and the lake appeared wider than she expected, a sheet of dull silver under a gray sky, its shoreline broken by clusters of cedar. She slowed the car without deciding to. She had been looking at a small painting of this water for 16 years. A smaller road branched toward the water. She turned onto it, and the tires crunched over gravel, and Tucker stood up in the back seat, now bracing his front paws on the seat back, peering over her shoulder. The mailbox came first, a leaning post, the numbers faded but readable. She pulled into the drive and shut off the engine. Silence. No traffic. No sirens. Only wind moving through branches and the faint ripple of water against something wooden. The cabin stood about 30 yards from the lake, smaller than she had imagined, but sturdier than she had feared. The siding was weathered, gray-aged rather than rotted. The roof sagged a little near the back corner. One shutter hung crooked beside the front window. The porch steps dipped toward the center, and there off to the side, leaning against the dark water, exactly as it had leaned in the hallway oil for 16 years, was the dock. The painting had been a portrait of this place. He had hung it where she walked past it every single day, and he had said nothing, and she had asked nothing, and the not asking sat in her chest now like a swallowed stone. Minimal market value, she thought, and the words felt almost like a dare. She stepped out. The cold brushed her face, not harsh, just steady. Tucker jumped down beside her and went still, scanning the clearing, his body tightening for a moment as he read the place. Then he began to move. Slowly at first, he walked the perimeter in a wide arc, nose low to the ground, methodical rather than frantic. He sniffed the porch posts, the edge of the steps, the corner where siding met stone foundation. He did not bark. He did not growl. He absorbed. She watched him from beside the car, and something about the patience of it made her uneasy in a way she could not name. The boards creaked under her weight as she crossed the porch. The railing was solid when she pressed her palm against it. She took the brass key from the lawyer's envelope, simple, no engraving, and slid it into the lock. It turned without resistance, and that surprised her more than anything. A lock left to 10 years of lake winter seizes up. This one had been oiled. The door opened inward with a long, dry groan. Inside, the air smelled of cedar and dust and cold stone. Not mold, not decay, just stillness. Light came through the front windows in narrow beams. The living room was modest, a worn leather couch against one wall, a narrow table beneath the window, a cast iron stove anchored near the center, its surface dark and faintly rusted. A braided rug lay crooked on the floor. The place had not been lived in recently, but it had not been abandoned either. Tucker entered last tail low but not tucked and inhaled deeply twice. Then he moved through the rooms, the small kitchen with its dulled metal handles, the short hall toward a bedroom with a single iron frame bed and a folded quilt of blue and white squares clean to the touch. She followed him slowly, and when she came back to the living room, he was standing at the front window, staring out toward the lake and the leaning dock. She crouched by the stove. Beside it sat a crate of split firewood arranged in neat rows. She brushed her fingers across the top piece. Dry. Who had stacked it? The thought stopped her cold. A cabin left empty for years did not keep dry firewood in neat rows. Someone had been here, recently, often enough to keep the wood dry and the lock oiled and the quilt clean. The cabin did not feel discarded, she realized. It felt paused, as if a man had stepped out the door fully intending to come back. She stood and walked through to a second door at the back, which opened onto a smaller clearing, and a shed taller than she expected, its double doors shut tight with a padlock that was newer than anything else on the property. Tucker joined her, stepped out first, and began another slow circuit, his nose tracing the foundation. He paused at one corner, sniffed longer, then moved on. She tried the shed doors. The padlock held. She did not have the key for it, and she stood looking at the bright metal of it against the weathered wood and added it to the growing list of things in this place that did not match the word minimal. She needed supplies. The refrigerator hummed when she plugged it in, but it was empty, the cabinets holding little more than 2 enamel mugs and a tin of loose tea. So she drove the few miles into town, which announced itself with a small wooden sign and a single blinking yellow light at the intersection of Main and Lake Street. Alder Ridge. The kind of town that did not rush. A hardware store with peeling red paint, a bakery with wide windows and lace curtains, a bait shop, a post office no bigger than a shed. She parked near the bakery, and the bell above the door jingled as she entered, and warmth wrapped around her cinnamon and fresh bread and coffee. Behind the counter stood a woman in her early 60s with dark hair pulled into a loose bun, a flour-dusted apron over a green sweater. "Morning," the woman said, wiping her hands on a towel. "You're new." Her tone was not suspicious, only observant. "Yes, I'm staying at the cabin near the North Bend." The woman's hand stilled for half a second. "The Whitfield place." Maren nodded slowly. "My husband owned it." "Della Brennan." She extended a hand and her eyes had sharpened, though her voice stayed warm. "Maren Whitfield." "And this," Della said, glancing down as Tucker stepped through the door and scanned the room before committing to it, "must be the dog Hollis talked about." She caught herself just barely, but Maren caught it too. "He talked about his dog. He talked about a lot of things." Della turned to pour coffee into a paper cup, and the words came out almost casual, the way the truest things often do. Hollis was up here more than folks back home realized. The cup was warm in Maren's hands. He never mentioned it much. Some men keep their quiet places quiet. Della handed it across. There was something measured in her tone, not gossip, not accusation, just fact. The fact of a woman who knew more than she was going to say to a stranger on the first morning. "You'll want groceries from Halverson's. 2 blocks down. Arnie still runs it." She hesitated, then added lower as if it cost her something. "He thought a great deal of you, Hollis did. Whatever it looks like from where you're standing. You should hold on to that till you understand it." Maren did not know what to do with that, so she thanked her and stepped back into the cold, which hit harder after the warmth, and walked the creaking boardwalk to the market. Halverson's was narrower than it looked, a bell chiming as she entered. A tall man in his 70s stood by the register, white hair combed straight back, shoulders rounded but sturdy, a flannel shirt under a canvas vest. He looked up. "Morning," he said. She introduced herself, and his expression changed when she mentioned the cabin. "Hollis's place," he said. "Yes," he passed. A pause. "Sorry to hear it." He studied her a moment longer than was strictly polite, not rude, just weighing something. He always had an eye on that shoreline, Arn said. Made sure things stayed the way they were. "What do you mean?" He shrugged lightly and rang up her beans and her bread. Just that, didn't care for developers sniffing around. Developers. The word felt foreign here among shelves of canned goods and fishing line. And then unbidden, it placed itself beside another thing, a cream-colored business card sliding into a breast pocket. Royce Caldwell, Lakemont Resort Group. Waterfront acquisition. Her stomach shifted. That was when the bell chimed again behind her and a man came in on a draft of cold air. 50s brought a barn jacket and work boots that had never seen much work. He went still when he saw her, and his face arranged itself into the smile of a man who has decided what he wants before the conversation begins. "You'd be the widow," he said, "up at the Whitfield cabin." He did not offer his hand. "Roy Tamblin, Maren Whitfield, sorry for your loss." The words were correct and entirely empty. He hooked his thumbs in his pockets. Folks were wondering what had happened to that place. It's a lot of upkeep for one person. A lot of cold winters. He let that sit. "If you ever think about selling, you come to me first, before anybody else. I know people who'd take it off your hands fair. Save you the trouble." There was something underneath the offer that Maren did not like, an eagerness that did not match a remote cabin of minimal market value. Why would a man press so hard on the first morning over a place worth almost nothing? "I just got here," she said. "Sure, sure." Roy smiled wider. "I'm only saying, don't go signing with anybody else till you and me talk." Behind the register, Arnie set her bread into a paper sack with a sharp crinkle. "She's not signing anything, Roy," he said evenly, and his eyes did not leave the younger man. Roy's smile thinned. "Didn't ask you, Arn." But he gave Maren a small nod, the kind that is more warning than courtesy, and went back out into the cold. The bell jangled behind him. Through the window, she watched him stop on the sidewalk and take out a phone and make a call before he had gone 3 steps, and she thought of Grady in the doorway doing the same thing, 2 men in 2 states reaching for the same gesture, and the unease in her went a shade darker. Arnie slid the sack across the counter. "Don't sign anything for that one," he said quietly. "Whatever he tells you, don't put your name to a thing of Roy Tamblin's." He would not say more, and she did not push, but she carried the warning out the door along with her groceries, and it sat heavier than the bags. Back at the cabin, the afternoon light had gone thin and gray. Tucker went through the doorway ahead of her and began his quiet patrol again. The kitchen, the hall, and then he came to rest in front of the wall beside the stone fireplace. He sat, ears forward, body still. He did not bark or scratch. He only stared at the wood paneling as though it were a door he was waiting for someone to open. "What is it?" she asked softly. He did not turn his head. He shifted one ear back to acknowledge her voice and then faced the wall again. She set the groceries down and watched him, and a small, cold thread of unease worked its way up her spine. Hollis had been here, often, more than she had ever known. He had driven hours north again and again for years and had never once told her why. A man does not keep a thing that quiet unless the quiet is the whole point. She thought of the oiled lock and the new padlock on the shed and the dry firewood, all the small evidence of a tended life, and she thought of the painting in the hallway, and she sat down on the worn couch with her coat still on, and let herself feel fully for the first time that she had been married to a man with a country she had never been given a map to. By late afternoon, the clouds rolled in low from the west, and just after sunset, the lake spoke for the first time. A sharp crack, sudden as a rifle shot, echoing across the clearing and into the cabin walls. Her heart jumped before her mind caught up. Ice. It had to be ice shifting against itself in the cold. Another crack followed, splintering across the surface of the water, and Tucker was at the window in seconds, muscles tight but not panicked. She warned him. The lake's surface was shifting under the failing light, thin fractures spreading outward like veins, and the sound was not violent so much as it was certain the sound of something enormous and patient changing its shape. She stood there a long time, watching the ice break in the dark. Up here, more than folks realized. She murmured it to the glass, and Tucker pressed against her leg, and the town's careful half-answers turned over in her mind. Della's hands going still, and the strange, tender thing she had said about holding on. Arn weighing her with his eyes. Roy Tamblin pressing to buy a worthless cabin before she had even unpacked and reaching for his phone the moment he hit the sidewalk. A business card vanishing into a breast pocket. A growling dog and a dark SUV that did not move. Sloane's voice in the cold, thin, and frightened. Some of it isn't what it looks like. She did not have the shape of it yet. She only knew the way you know weather before it arrives, that she had driven north, thinking she carried a small and final humiliation, and that she had instead driven straight into the middle of something. Something Hollis had built, something he had hidden, something a stranger in a barn jacket already wanted, and a man in a tinted SUV had followed her halfway across 2 states to keep an eye on. The cabin had not been the leftover. She was beginning to understand that. The cabin had been the point. Behind her, Tucker rose again. He crossed the floor slowly, nose grazing the wood, and stopped once more in front of the fireplace wall. He sat. He waited. And outside in the dark, the lake cracked again, long and low, like a question that had finally found someone in the room to ask. 3 nights into the cold, Tucker stopped waiting and started working. Maren woke before dawn to the soft shift of a floorboard, and when she came into the front room with the quilt around her shoulders, she found him standing at the fireplace wall. Not at the window this time, not listening for the lake. He was facing the dark wood paneling beside the stone hearth, and he was not pacing or whining. He sat, ears forward, nose lifting as he drew in the air the way he might read the wind off a field, and then he lifted one paw and touched the wall. Not a scratch, a tap. Light and deliberate, the way you knock on a door when you already know someone is on the other side. "All right," she whispered. "All right, show me." She crossed the cold floor and pressed her palm flat against the boards. They were tight, solid, unremarkable to the touch. The fireplace itself was built of stacked fieldstone, uneven and heavy, and the paneling ran vertical from floor to ceiling, with nothing about it that asked to be noticed. She reached for the iron poker leaning against the stove and tapped along the wood, slow listening. Solid, solid, solid. Then a hollow knock, subtle, almost lost beneath the echo of the room. She froze, tapped again in the same place. The sound came back wrong, lighter than the rest, and her throat went tight. Tucker stood and pressed his nose to the seam between 2 boards, drawing the air in long and slow, and she knelt and ran her hands along the base of the wall. The boards near the floor were faintly darker, as if handled often. One nail head sat a fraction lower than the others. She pressed it. Nothing. She pressed harder, and it gave beneath her thumb, not loose, but designed, a thing made to be found by someone patient enough to look. Her hands were shaking now, not from the cold. She slid her fingers up the seam to shoulder height, found a slight unevenness in the grain, and pushed. A faint click sounded from inside the wall. She stepped back. The cabin seemed to hold its breath around her. She pushed once more, and a panel no wider than her hand swung inward on a concealed hinge. Behind it was darkness. She carried the lamp closer, angling the light into the cavity, and dust drifted in the narrow beam. On a small built-in shelf rested a steel tube about a foot long, sealed at both ends with rubber rings. Not rusted, not forgotten, placed there by a careful hand and meant to be safe. Her chest pulled so tight she had to sit back on her heels. Tucker came forward and sniffed once toward the opening, then lay down beside her. His body angled toward the front door, as if the rest of it was hers to do alone. He had done his part. He had carried her to the wall the way he had carried her through the will reading, and now he simply guarded the room while she reached in and closed her fingers around the cold metal. It was heavier than it looked. When she drew it free, the wood behind it showed clean-cut edges. No splinters built into the structure on purpose by someone who knew this cabin down to its bones. She sat on the braided rug with the tube in her lap and the stove ticking beside her, and for a long moment she did not open it. She had spent a career as the keeper of other people's records, the woman who knew which box held which year, and she understood that some things once read cannot be unread. Then she twisted one end. It resisted, then gave with a low metallic turn, and a soft seal released. Inside, rolled tight, was paper, and beneath it, something firmer, leather. She eased the paper out first and laid it on the rug. Photographs, 3 of them. The top one showed Hollis, younger than the man she had married, his hair dark, his shoulders broad, standing near this very water, with the light striking it behind him. He was smiling. Not the careful smile he wore at neighborhood dinners, but a full one, open, the smile of a man who has not yet learned to keep anything quiet. Beside him stood 2 other men. One of them she knew at once, even with the beard gone dark with youth. Arnie Halverson. The other man she did not recognize, lean and serious, and the 3 of them held a half-built wooden boat frame between them, like something they had made together. The second photograph was the cabin itself years ago. The siding fresh, the dock straight, and she recognized the composition with a small lurch because it was nearly the angle of the painting in the hallway, as if the same eye had framed both. The third made her breath catch. Hollis alone on the shoreline at dusk, looking out at the horizon, his face set in an expression she had never once seen across a dinner table. He had stood here, more than once, without her, without a word. She set the photographs aside and picked up the notebook. The leather was soft and flexible at the edges, worn smooth from being opened many times. The first page was dated 14 years back, and the handwriting was unmistakably his, the letters leaning slightly forward as though always in motion. The entry was plain: initial meeting with cooperative members completed, funding structure agreed. Her pulse climbed. She turned the page and then another, and the entries went on month after month, year after year. Payments recorded in careful columns, small at first, then larger. Dock reinforcement fund, winter storm repair, youth apprenticeship stipend approved. Page after page in his hand, a second life, laid out in ink, deliberate and unhurried. Alder Lake Cooperative Trust, written in bold strokes near the top of one page. Meeting notes, signatures, shoreline preservation clauses, voting rights percentages. This was no hobby, no fishing escape. This was a thing he had built with both hands over half the years of their marriage, and she had been asleep beside him the whole time, believing she knew the full shape of the man. She read until the light at the window went from black to gray to a thin winter white, and she did not feel the cold or the hour. There were names she did not know and names she would come to know. There were sums that started in the hundreds and climbed into figures that did not belong anywhere near the phrase minimal market value. And there were small human notes tucked between the columns in his hand that undid her more than the numbers. Caleb's boy passed his certification. Good day at the marina. Della's knee is bad again, sent someone to shovel. He had loved these people. He had loved this place. He had carried a whole second tenderness in him for a decade and a half and had brought home to her only its quiet residue, the long drives, the closed study door, the painting on the wall. At the back of the notebook, folded once, was a single sheet of heavier paper. She opened it slowly. Not legal language. One sentence in his hand. If anything happens to me, she deserves the truth. He had not written her name. He had not needed to. She read the word she 3 times and felt her vision blur, and outside the lake gave a long, low groan as the ice shifted under the warming dark. Tucker's tail brushed the rug once. She closed the notebook and held it against her chest and understood that the hurt of that office had not gone anywhere. It had only changed its shape into something sharper and more useful, something with a direction. Hollis had not erased her. He had hidden something out of reach of everyone but her, sealed it inside a wall, and trusted a wife to find it. The question was no longer whether her name had been spoken. The question was why a careful man builds a thing in silence for 15 years and what he was so afraid of that he could not say it out loud. The next morning, she went looking for the third man in the photograph. Arn told her after a long pause behind his register that the lean, serious one was Owen Ashby, that he lived out past the far end of the lake on a rutted county road, that he had been Hollis's oldest friend up here and was not well anymore. He doesn't take visitors much, Arn said, but you bring that photograph. He'll talk to you. He wrote the directions on the back of a receipt and would not meet her eyes when he handed it over, and she understood there were things Arnie knew that he would let another man tell her. Owen Ashby's place was a low house with a wood stove chimney and a wheelchair ramp built recently over older steps. When he opened the door, he was thinner than the man in the picture by 40 years, and a serious illness, an oxygen line looped beneath his nose, the small machine breathing along behind him in steady mechanical pulls. But the eyes were the same eyes, sharp, weighing. He looked at her face, then at the dog, then at the photograph she held out, and something in him settled. "You're his wife," Owen said. His voice came rough, spaced around the rhythm of the machine. "He showed me a picture once, said you didn't know about any of this." He stepped back from the door. "Suppose it's time you did. Come in out of the cold." The house was warm and close and smelled of pine resin and medicine. She sat across from him in a worn chair while Tucker lay near the stove, and Owen looked at the photograph for a long while before he spoke. "That's the summer we started," he said. "Hollis, me, and Arn. We were younger than we had any right to be." He set the photo on his knee. "You ever hear of Lake Seneca?" "No, course you didn't." A dry sound that might have been a laugh cut short by the machine. "Nobody has, not the way it was. 40 miles east. We grew up on it, the 3 of us. Cleanest water you ever saw. Then a development outfit came through, bought the shoreline parcel by parcel from folks who needed money more than they needed the lake. Built it up, concrete, gates, private docks where the public landing used to be." He paused, his chest working. "By the time we understood what was happening, it was done. The men who fished it their whole lives couldn't get to the water anymore. Whole families moved off. Lake's still there, but it isn't a lake anymore. It's a parking lot with a view." Maren said nothing. She had learned long ago that some men only tell you the important things if you let the silence stay open. "Hollis swore it wouldn't happen here," Owen went on. "Not to Alder. So he did the only thing that works against money. He used money, quietly, bought up the small shares as folks aged out before anybody bigger could, funded the things that kept the town tied to the water, the dock, the kids program, the winter gathering. He held it all together so it couldn't be picked apart. He looked at her directly now. He did it quiet for a reason, Mrs. Whitfield. You understand that part. No, she said. I don't. That's why I'm here. Owen's jaw tightened. The machine pulled. Because they leaned on him, he said. Lakemont, same kind of outfit that took Senec, different name. When they figured out what he was doing up here, they came at him. Phone calls, lawyers, a man at his office. Then it stopped being lawyers. He stopped deciding how much to carry. There was a night somebody put a brick through the front window of this cabin. There was a letter that came to your house in Milwaukee, and Hollis got to the mailbox before you did, and he never told you what it said. He kept you out of it on purpose, not to shut you out, to keep them from ever having a reason to come to your door. The room went very quiet except for the breathing of the machine. She had spent 12 days believing her husband had forgotten her in the most final way a man can. Now she sat in a stranger's warm front room and understood that the silence she had taken for absence had been a kind of shield held over her head for years by a man who never let her see how heavy his arms had gotten. Her eyes stung. She did not let it pass that. He should have told me, she said, and her voice was steadier than she felt. I could have carried some of it. I carried a marriage 30 years. I could have carried this. Maybe. Owen folded the photograph closed and handed it back. Men our age, we get an idea about protecting people. We don't always notice it can feel like being left behind. He held her gaze. I did the same to my own wife, God rest her, kept the worst of Senec from her till the day she asked me why I cried in my sleep. We think we're being strong. We're just being alone in front of company. The machine pulled. He left you the cabin, didn't he? He left me the cabin. Then he didn't leave you behind. He left you the keys to the whole thing and trusted you to figure out what they opened. Question is whether you've got the spine for what comes next. Because they're not done. They were never going to be done. She did not answer that. She did not have to. She drove home with the photograph on the seat beside her and Owen Ashby's words settling into her like cold settles into a foundation, and she found that the grief had moved over to make room for something with edges. The first piece of what came next was waiting for her at the bakery the following morning, and it came in a form she did not expect. She had stopped for bread, and Della was unusually quiet, her hands busy and her eyes troubled, and when Maren turned to go, Della said low, "There's a girl you should know about. Bertie Olson, 16. She's in the apprenticeship program, the one your husband funded. Good kid, smart with her hands." Della wiped the counter that did not need wiping. Roy Tamblin's been by her family's place twice now, telling her father the program's going to close, that the trust is finished, that the smart move is to back the sale before the cabin's gone for nothing. She finally looked up. He told them if they don't get on the right side of this birdie spot is the first one cut. A 16-year-old. He's using a 16-year-old to buy votes. The word votes landed in Maren's chest like a stone dropped down a well. What sale? Maren asked. Whose votes? That's the thing nobody has saying out loud yet. Della lowered her voice further, though the shop was empty. Roy's been telling people there's going to be a vote at the cooperative to decide things. He says it like it's already settled, like he's counting. She pressed her lips together. I don't know all of it, Maren. I just know that man has gone from a nuisance to something worse in about a week. And it started the day you came to town. That night, late after the lake had gone quiet, and the stove had burned down to embers. A knock came at the cabin door. Tucker was up before the second knock, not barking, his body low and ready. Maren opened the door to find a girl standing on the porch in a coat too thin for the cold, her breath fogging fast, her eyes red-rimmed. Behind her, no car. She had walked. "Mrs. Whitfield." The girl's voice cracked. "I'm Bertie. Bertie Olson. I didn't know where else." She stopped. Tucker stepped forward and pressed his head against the girl's hand, and something in her broke a little, the way kids break when an animal is kind to them at the wrong moment. "Mr. Tamblyn came to our house again tonight. He told my dad if we don't sign the petition by Friday, I'm done, and the marina job after. And he said," she swallowed, "he said you're going to sell anyway, that you're just an old woman who doesn't understand what she's holding, and you'll take the money and leave us all stranded, and we should get out while there's still a deal." Maren stood in the cold doorway with the girl's frightened face turned up to hers and felt the last of the grief burn off entirely. An old woman who doesn't understand what she's holding. She understood now. She understood exactly. "Come inside," she said. "You're not walking home in this. And Bertie." She waited until the girl looked at her. "Nobody is taking your spot. Not Roy Tamblyn. Not anybody. You have my word." She made the girl cocoa on the cast iron stove, and the girl sat wrapped in the blue and white quilt with Tucker's head heavy in her lap, and slowly the story came out the way stories come out of frightened children when the room is warm and the dog is kind. Her father worked summers at the marina the trust ran. Her mother cleaned the rentals. The apprenticeship was the first thing in Bertie's life that had felt like a future, learning to shape wood and fit a hull taught by old men who did not talk down to her. And Roy Tamblyn had sat at their kitchen table and made all of it conditional on a signature, and her father, who had never had power over much in his life, had looked at the petition and looked at his daughter and not known what to do. "He's not a bad man, my dad," Bertie said. "He's just scared. Mr. Tamblyn makes it sound like the whole town's going under, and we're the only fools who won't get in the boat." "Your father isn't a fool," Maren said, "and he isn't going under. Tell him that for me. Tell him the woman from the cabin said the boat Roy Tamblyn's selling has a hole in it." She drove the girl home in the morning and watched her go up the walk of a small, tired house with a snowed-under truck in the drive, and then she drove straight into Alder Ridge to the narrow building with the frosted windows and the brass plaque she had noted on her first day in town. Easton and Pierce attorneys at law. Because Owen had told her the trust had a lawyer, a woman named Quinn Easton, and because a man like Roy Tamblyn did not move on his own. Somebody was paying for his confidence. The office smelled of paper and lemon oil. A woman in her early 40s came out from behind the desk, composed and sharp-eyed, dark hair pulled back, a navy blazer over a white blouse. She took one look at the leather notebook Maren set on the desk, and her professional calm flickered into something more careful. "Mrs. Whitfield," she said. It was not a question. "I wondered when you'd come." She opened the notebook and turned the pages without rushing, and when she looked up, her expression had hardened into resolve. "He never told you," Quinn said, "about any of it." "No, he thought he had time." "He thought a lot of things." Quinn closed the cover. "I'll tell you what the cabin is, because the lawyer in Milwaukee either didn't know or didn't say. That language in the will, minimal market value, that's true of the structure. The building's worth almost nothing." She leaned forward. "But that parcel of land is the anchor of the trust. Whoever holds the cabin holds the controlling vote. Without it, the cooperative loses its majority, and the shoreline can be open to development. With it, one person decides whether this lake stays the way it is." She let that settle. Your husband made sure that one person would be you." The room seemed to tilt. Maren set both hands flat on the desk to steady it. But Quinn was watching her the way a person watches a stranger they have not decided to trust, and there was a coolness in it that Maren had not earned and did not understand until the lawyer spoke again. "I have to be honest with you," Quinn said. "I don't know you. I knew your husband, and I knew what he wanted, but I've watched you be in town for 4 days, and in those 4 days, Roy Tamblyn has told half the county you're going to fold and sell. So I need to ask you a plain question, and I need a plain answer." Her eyes did not move. "Are you here to protect what Hollis built? Or are you here to find out what it's worth and take the offer the way Roy keeps promising people you will? Because if it's the second one, I'd rather you tell me now, before these people put their faith in you and you break it the way the last shareholder who got cold feet broke it." It was not a kind question. It was a fair one, and Maren felt the sting and the respect of it at the same time. "4 days ago," she said slowly, "I sat in a room and listened to my name not get read out loud. I drove up here thinking my husband had thrown me away." She held the lawyer's gaze. "Then a dog showed me a hole in a wall, and a dying man told me about a lake that turned into something nobody can reach anymore. And a 16-year-old walked 2 miles in the cold to my door because a grown man threatened her future to buy a vote." Her voice did not rise. It did not need to. "I am not selling, not for myself, not for them. You can decide whether to believe me, but you'll decide it watching what I do, not listening to what I say." Something in Quinn Easton's face shifted the cool calculation, easing into the beginning of an alliance. She studied Maren a moment longer, then opened a drawer and drew out a folder and laid it on the desk between them. "All right," she said, "then there's something you need to see, and you're not going to like it." She opened the folder. Inside were 2 documents side by side. "This is the original trust agreement. This is the will revision your stepson filed during your husband's hospital stay, the one that left you the cabin and the cabin alone." Her finger moved between the two. "Look at the signatures." Maren looked. Hollis's hand was on both. The same forward-leaning letters she had traced across 14 years of notebook entries the night before. But on the will revision, the slant was wrong. The pressure uneven, the loop of the H too round, the line of the final name trailing off, as though the hand that made it had been guided rather than guiding. "I've seen your husband's signature on 40 documents, Quinn said quietly. "I have them in this office. That is not his hand on a good day, and the hospital records say he was barely conscious the week it's dated." She closed the folder. "I think the revision is forged, Mrs. Whitfield. I think your stepson didn't just talk a sick man into changing his will. I think he changed it for him. And if I'm right, that is a great deal more than a family dispute. That is a crime, and it does not go away because the man who committed it is family." Maren sat with that for a long moment. The cold thing that had been gathering in her since the will reading finally had a name, and the name was uglier than she had let herself imagine. "Then why," she asked, "would he forge a will that still leaves me the most important piece? If Grady knew what the cabin anchors, why hand it to me at all?" Quinn's mouth tightened. "Because he didn't know. Not then. The revision was rushed, sloppy, done by a man who thought he was cutting his stepmother out of an estate and tossing her a worthless shack to keep her quiet. He found out later what the shack was worth. That's why he's circling now. He's trying to take back something he already gave away because he didn't read the ground he was standing on." She paused. "Which means you have a little time. Not much, but some." Outside the frosted window, a vehicle slowed on the street, and through the warped glass, Maren saw the dark shape of it idling at the curb. Tucker, lying by the door, lifted his head and began low in his chest to growl. Quinn followed her gaze and her face changed. "That's not Grady's car," Quinn said. "That's Roy's truck. And he doesn't park outside my office unless he means for me to see him do it." Maren rose. "Then let him see me walk out of it." She did not wait for advice. She gathered the notebook and the folder and stepped out into the cold Tucker at her knee and crossed the sidewalk to where Roy Tamblyn sat in his idling truck, with the window already rolling down, because he had been waiting for exactly this, the chance to catch her alone and afraid on a public street. "Mrs. Whitfield." He draped an arm over the door. "Funny place to spend a morning. Lawyers cost money. Money you'd have more of if you weren't so set on doing things the hard way." "You've been to the Olsons twice," she said. No greeting, no softening. "You sat at a man's table and used his daughter against him." Roy's smile did not move, but something behind it did. "I don't know what that child told you. She told me the truth. I believe her, and I think a room full of her neighbors will believe her too when the time comes." Maren stepped closer to the truck, close enough that he had to look up at her. An old woman in a navy coat with a dog beside her and a folder under her arm, and she watched the calculation run behind his eyes as he revised in real time the picture he had been selling all over the county of a confused widow ready to fold. "You've told everyone I'm going to sell. You've told them I don't understand what I'm holding. Let me save you the trouble of guessing." Her voice stayed low and even, and it carried in the cold, quiet street the way a quiet voice carries when everyone has stopped to listen. "I understand exactly what I'm holding. I am not selling it. And every time you put my name in your mouth in somebody's kitchen, I am going to hear about it, and I am going to remember it. And when this is finished, it is going to be your name. People in this town can't say without spitting. Not mine." For a moment, Roy Tamblyn had nothing. The barn jacket, confidence, the salesman's ease, all of it caught like a wheel in mud. Then he recovered the way men like him always do, with a small, ugly laugh. "Big talk for a week in town." He put the truck in gear. "We'll see how you feel about hard winters come Friday. You don't have the votes, lady. You don't even have the names." He pulled away from the curb, and gravel ticked under the tires, and Maren stood in the street and watched him go, and did not let her face show that he had landed a true thing. He was right about one part. She did not have the votes. She had 4 days, a notebook, a dying man, and a frightened child against a deadline she had not even fully understood until this morning. Behind her, the office door opened. Quinn stood in it with her arms crossed and an expression Maren had not seen on her before, something close to respect mixed with alarm. "Friday," Quinn said. "He said Friday." "He did. Then we don't have a little time after all." Quinn held the door wider. "Come back inside, Mrs. Whitfield. We have a great deal to do and not enough days to do it in, and I am going to need you to tell me everything that dog has found, because I think your husband left more in that cabin than a notebook, and I think Roy Tamblyn knows it, and I think that is why he is so very, very afraid of you." The SUV came 2 days before Friday, just after noon. Tucker heard it first, his head lifting before the engine reached her ears, and she went to the window to watch the black SUV round the bend and roll slowly across the thawing gravel. It stopped short of the porch. Grady stepped out of the passenger side in the same navy coat from the office, and it looked smaller against the pines than it had under fluorescent light. A second man came around from the far door. 50s polished boots that had never broken a sweat, a tailored jacket, a leather portfolio tucked under one arm. He moved like a man who had bought and sold places like this his whole life and had never once stood on a dock at dawn. Maren stepped out onto the porch and pulled the door shut behind her. Tucker came with her and took up a position at her knee tail, low ears, high calm, and entirely awake. "You've settled in," Grady said, looking around the clearing as though he were appraising it. She did not answer. The wind moved between them. "This is Royce Caldwell." Grady tipped his head toward the man with the portfolio. "He represents Lakemont Resort Group." Caldwell gave a small nod. "Mrs. Whitfield." His voice was smooth and warm and rehearsed. "I know who he represents," she said. "I found his card on the floor of your car the day they read the will. You took it back rather fast for old paperwork." Something flickered across Grady's face. He had not known she had seen it or had hoped she had forgotten. He recovered the way he always did and stepped closer to the bottom stair. "We need to talk about the property," he said. "Specifically your interest in the trust. You have a controlling vote up here. That wasn't made clear to you in Milwaukee." "No," she said evenly. "It wasn't. You made sure of that. You were standing in the room when it wasn't made clear." His jaw tightened. Caldwell smoothed over the moment with the ease of a man who handled difficult rooms for a living. "Mrs. Whitfield, the lake is underutilized. There's real demand for waterfront, real money, and frankly, real benefit to this town. Jobs, tax base, a marina people would actually drive to see." He opened the portfolio without being asked the way salesmen do and turned it toward her glossy renderings of docks and decks and a clubhouse with a green roof. "We're not asking you to give anything up. We're offering a partnership. You keep a stake. You keep a title. You let people who do this for a living handle the development, and you never worry about a leaking roof or a property tax bill again. At your age, that's not a small thing." "At your age." The phrase sat in the cold air and Maren let it. "What you're describing," she said, "is what happened to Lake Seneca." For the first time, Caldwell's smooth surface caught on something. He had not expected her to know the name. He glanced at Grady, a fast, involuntary thing, and Grady's silence told her everything about who had filled this man in and who had left things out. "I'm going to see Seneca for myself," she went on. "And when I do, I expect I'll see exactly what an old friend of my husband's told me I'd see. So you can keep the pictures, Mr. Caldwell. I've already got a clearer one than anything in that folder." She held his gaze. "There's no partnership here. There was never going to be one. You can get back in the car." Grady's composure cracked. He came up onto the first stair. "You don't even live here," he said, and the contempt finally showed through the thing that had been under the polite neutrality since the office 12 days ago. "You've been here a week. You buried my father, and then you ran off to a shack in the woods to play lake warden, and you think that makes it yours. You don't understand what this could become." Tucker shifted his weight and stepped forward, placing himself between the man and the woman on the porch. Not a snarl, not a lunge, just 90 pounds of certainty filling the space between Grady's foot and the next stair. Grady stopped. "I understand exactly what it already is," Maren said. "I understand it better than you understood your own father. He built something that would outlast him, and the first thing you did when he couldn't lift a pen was reach over and lift it for him." The words went out into the cold before she had decided to risk them, and she watched them land, and she knew at once that she had told Grady something she should perhaps have kept. His face went pale, then hard, and the alarm she had seen in the probate office came back into his eyes. Except this time it was not the alarm of a man caught with a card on the floor. It was the alarm of a man who has just learned that his stepmother knows the worst thing he has ever done. He took his foot off the stair and stepped back, and the retreat was worse than any threat because it meant he had stopped trying to persuade her and started calculating. "This isn't over," Grady said. "No," she agreed, "it isn't." The door shut harder than necessary. Gravel snapped under the tires as the SUV reversed and swung out and disappeared behind the trees, and the clearing went quiet again. But it was not the quiet of before. Tucker's ears lowered slowly as the engine faded. Maren crouched and rested her hand on his shoulder and felt him lean into it, and for a moment she let herself breathe. She had held the porch. She had not folded. The phone in her coat pocket buzzed before her knees had finished straightening. A message from Grady. She read it standing in the cold. The trust holds a vote Friday to confirm shareholders of record. You have until then. Sign Caldwell's offer, and you walk away comfortable. Refuse, and we challenge your standing on the basis of the estate documents, and we have the shares to remove you. Either way, the cabin changes hands by spring. Don't be sentimental, Maren. You're 68. Take the money. She read it twice. Then she locked the screen and slid the phone away and stood looking at the lake where the ice had begun to darken at its edges and pull back from the shore in slow, patient seams. He meant to do it the legal way and the dirty way at once, to challenge her standing using the very document Quinn believed was forged, and to gather enough shareholder votes to remove her before anyone could prove anything. And the man buying those votes door to door with threats against a 16-year-old girl was Roy Tamblyn. The pieces fit now into a single ugly machine, and she was standing in front of it with 2 days to find a way to jam the gears. She did not sleep that night. She sat at the kitchen table with the notebook open and Tucker's chin resting on her foot, and she did the thing a librarian does best. She read. She found in Hollis's careful columns the names of every shareholder and the size of every stake, and she counted, and the counting did not comfort her. Roy had been working for weeks. Grady had money and a deadline. She had 2 days in town and a beau and a dying friend, and the arithmetic of votes did not care how right she was. But she also found near the back in a list she had skimmed past the first night 3 columns she had not understood until now. Shareholders, shares pledged to the trust, and a third column narrow marked only with initials and small notes. RT wants out, will sell cheap. CO undecided, owes Marina back rent. HM solid won't sell at any price. Hollis had been counting too, for years, the same way Roy was counting now, except that Hollis had counted with care for the people behind the numbers. She traced the column with her finger and understood that her husband had left her not just the anchor of the trust, but a map of every soul she would need to reach, and a quiet sense of who could be trusted and who could be turned. In the morning, she drove to Owen Ashby's house. He was worse than the week before. The machine pulled harder, and his hands shook when they rested on the arms of the chair, but his eyes were the same, and they found her and read the trouble on her in a second. They moved, he said. It was not a question. She told him all of it. The deadline, the challenge to her standing, Roy gathering votes, the forged signature Quinn had found, the map in the back of the notebook. Owen listened without interrupting, his chest working, and when she finished, he was quiet for a long moment, and then he said something she did not expect. "Get your coat back on," he said. "We're taking a drive." "Owen, you shouldn't be. I've got nothing left to spend it on but this." He was already reaching for the portable tank beside the chair. "There's a thing you keep saying you're going to see that you haven't. I'm tired of you talking about it like a thing in a story. Drive me to Senec. You need to look at it once with your own eyes before that meeting, so that when you stand up in that room, you're not protecting an idea your husband had. You're protecting a place you watched happen to somebody else." So she drove him east 40 miles with the tank hissing softly between them, and Tucker stretched across the back seat, and Owen pointed the turns from memory because the road had been part of him before it was paved. He talked the whole way in the short, measured sentences the machine allowed him about a boy named Hollis who could not throw a baseball but could read water like a book, about the summer the 3 of them built a boat that sank on its first launch, and how they laughed until they cried sitting in the shallows. She let him talk. She understood he was handing her the man piece by piece, the version she had never been given, so that she would carry the whole of him into Friday and not just the wound. And then the trees opened, and there it was. She had braced for it, and the bracing did no good. The water was still there, blue and indifferent under the winter sun, but a tall iron fence ran the length of the shore, and behind it stood ranks of identical condominium units in colors chosen by a committee and a paved lot the size of a runway, mostly empty in the off-season, and a gate with a call box where the public landing used to be. A sign at the gate read, "Scenic Shores, a Lakemont community." Below it, smaller members and guests only. There was not a single person on the whole of that beautiful dead shoreline. Owen did not get out. He sat with his hand flat against the window and looked at the lake the three of them had grown up on, and his breath came short, and after a while he said very low, "We used to put a canoe in right there where the gate is. My father taught me to swim off a dock that's under that parking lot now." The machine pulled. They didn't take the water. You can still see the water. They just took everybody's way to reach it. That's the trick of it. They leave you the view and sell you back the right to stand in front of it. Maren sat with both hands on the wheel and felt the last soft part of her grief turn entirely to iron. She had driven north a widow who believed she had been thrown away. She would drive back to Alder, a woman who knew precisely what she was standing in front of and exactly what it cost to lose it. "All right," she said. "Now I've seen it." "Now you've seen it," Owen agreed. "Get me home." And Maren. He turned his head against the seat to look at her. It was the first time he had used her name. "Hollis picked you for this. Out of everybody. Don't you carry it like a burden he stuck you with. Carry it like the compliment it was." He was quiet a moment, the machine filling the silence. "And one more thing. When that meeting comes and Roy starts talking, you let him talk. Men like Roy always say more than they mean to when they think they've won. You wait. Then you put the girl in front of them. Not the numbers. The girl." His eyes closed. Numbers never moved anybody. A frightened child telling the truth has moved whole nations. Her phone rang as they pulled back into Alder Ridge. Not Grady, not Roy, Sloan. She almost let it go. Then she pulled over outside the bakery and answered, and Sloan's voice came through fast and frightened the way it had on the highway that first night, except that this time the words did not stop short. "Maren, I have to tell you something, and I need you to let me get through it." A breath. "I was there, at the hospital, the week before Dad died. Grady brought papers in. He told me Dad was awake and lucid and wanted to sign. But Dad wasn't Maren. He wasn't awake. I saw Grady put the pen in his hand and retrieve it. I told myself I didn't see what I saw because Grady's my brother and I didn't want it to be true." Her voice broke. "Tamblyn called my dad's old number looking for me. He wanted me to sign a statement saying Dad was sharp as a tack that week. That's when I knew. They're not just taking the lake. They're going to call our father competent, so the forgery holds, and they need me to lie to do it." A long, ragged breath. I won't do it. I'll say what I saw. To anyone. To a judge. I should have said it 12 days ago when I sat in that office and watched them read you out of his life like you were a tenant who hadn't paid." Maren closed her eyes in the cold car. The cruelty of it and the mercy of it arrived in the same instant. The man's own daughter, the one who had dabbed her eyes for appearances at the will reading, had been carrying the truth the whole time and had finally set down the weight of it. "Sloan," she said, "why now after everything? Why are you telling me now?" A silence. Then smaller, "Because you didn't crumble. They were all so sure you would. Grady was sure. And you just drove north, and stood up. I've spent 2 weeks ashamed that a woman my father wronged had more spine than his own daughter. A breath. I'm done being ashamed. Tell me where to be. There's a meeting Friday in the back of the market. Maren's voice did not shake. Will you say it there in front of the whole town? The silence stretched. Then steadier than Maren had ever heard her, yes, I'll drive up tonight. The cooperative met Friday afternoon in the back room of Halverson's Market, between the shelves of canned goods and the old yet refrigerator that ran louder than it should. Folding chairs had been pulled into a wide ring around a scarred table. Coffee went around in paper cups. The room was full in a way Arnie said it had not been in years because word of the vote had carried, and people came who had not come in a long time, and people came who had already decided to side with Roy, and they sat on opposite curves of the ring without anyone arranging it. Maren saw Bertie Olson near the door between her parents, her father a thin, worried man turning his cap in his hands. She saw Della. She saw faces from the notebook's columns. CO who owed the marina back rent. HM who would not sell at any price the living arithmetic of her husband's careful years. Roy Tamblyn sat near the front with the confidence of a man holding a winning hand. He had a folder of his own signed pledges, proxy forms, the machinery of a vote, bought one frightened family at a time. Grady stood against the back wall in his navy coat with Royce Caldwell beside him, and they did not sit because men who plan to leave early rarely do. Quinn Easton called the meeting to order and laid out the matter plainly. A challenge had been raised to Mrs. Whitfield's standing as the controlling shareholder on the basis of the estate documents. A vote had been demanded to confirm or remove her. She would allow each side to speak, and then the room would decide. Roy spoke first, and he was good at it, better than Maren had expected. He did not threaten now. He soothed. He talked about hard winters and rising costs and a town that was bleeding its young people, and he held up the Lakemont offer like a lifeline thrown to drowning men. He talked about jobs that would let kids stay instead of moving to the cities. He never once looked at Bertie Olson, whose future he had used as currency in her own kitchen, and Maren marked that the careful way his eyes avoided the one face in the room that could undo him. The truth is, Roy finished spreading his hands, this woman is a stranger. She buried her husband 2 weeks ago in another state. She doesn't know our names. She doesn't know our winters. And with respect, she's 68 years old and alone, and we are about to hand her the single most important decision this lake will ever face. I'm asking you to be reasonable. I'm asking you to confirm what we all know. She is not the right hand to hold this. A murmur moved through the room, some of it agreement. Maren felt the vote tilting the way you feel a boat list before you see the water move. She remembered Owen's instruction. Let him talk. Then the girl. Not the numbers. The girl. Then she stood. She did not have Roy's ease. She did not try for it. She set the leather notebook on the table where everyone could see it, and she let the silence stretch the way Owen had taught her without ever meaning to teach her anything. Roy's right about one thing, she said. I'm a stranger. I didn't know your names a week ago. I didn't know this lake. I didn't even know my own husband had spent 15 years up here building the thing you're all sitting inside of right now. She rested her hand on the notebook. He kept it from me. To protect me, I'm told, and maybe that was wrong of him. But he wrote your names in this book. Every one of you. He wrote down the dock he fixed and the storm he paid to repair and the program that's teaching a girl in this room how to work with her hands. She looked at Bertie then, and only then. He wrote her name. Bertie Olson, youth apprenticeship approved, in his own hand. Bertie's mother put an arm around her daughter. Roy says I'm not the right hand to hold this. Maren turned to face him. Let's talk about the hand that's been holding it. You've spent weeks going door to door telling people the trust is finished, that I'm going to sell, that they should take the money before it's gone. You went to the Olsons twice. You told a father that his daughter's future was the price of his vote. Her voice did not rise. It went quieter and the room leaned in to catch it. A 16-year-old girl walked 2 miles in the cold to my door because of what you said in her kitchen. So before this room decides whether I'm the right hand, I think it should hear from her. Not from me, from her. She did not order it. She simply turned and waited, and Bertie Olson looked at her mother and at her father turning his cap, and then she stood up on legs that shook and told the room in a small, clear voice exactly what Roy Tamblyn had said at her family's table twice, and what he had promised would happen to her if her father did not sign. There was no performance in it. That was what made it land. She did not call him a liar. She just said what he had said, word for word, the way a child remembers the words of an adult who frightened them. And the plain, ordinary cruelty of it filled the room. When she finished and sat down, the room was no longer murmuring. The room was silent, and the silence had turned against Roy Tamblyn like a tide going out. Roy was on his feet. "This is a child's confusion," he started. "I never—" "You did," said a voice from the doorway. Every head turned, the door had opened, and the cold came in, and with it the soft mechanical pull of an oxygen machine that everyone in that town knew the sound of, and almost no one had heard outside Owen Ashby's house in over a year. He came in slowly, leaning on a cane, the tank in a sling at his side, and Arnie crossed the room fast to take his arm, and Owen let him and the two old men came to the table together the way they had stood together in a photograph 40 years before. "Sit down, Roy," Owen said. His voice was a ruin of itself, and it filled the room anyway. "You're embarrassing the both of us, and I haven't got the breath to waste watching you do it." He lowered himself into the chair Quinn pulled out, and he set a manila envelope on the table beside the leather notebook. And he looked around the ring of faces, many of which had grown up calling him by his first name. "Most of you know me," he said. "Most of you know I don't come to things anymore. I came to this one because Hollis Whitfield was my friend for 60 years, and I am not going to sit in my house breathing out of a machine and let a thing be stolen off his grave." The machine pulled. "I helped him start this trust. Me and Arn and Hollis, 3 boys who watched another lake die 40 miles east of here and swore they'd never watch it twice. I know his signature like I know my own. I signed next to it 100 times. He tapped the envelope. His lawyers got the paper Grady Vaughn filed when Hollis was dying. I've seen it. That is not his hand. And the man's own daughter is standing right there ready to tell you she watched her brother move a dying man's fingers across a page." The room turned as one body toward the back wall, but Sloan Vaughn was already walking to the front. She had driven through the night, and her eyes showed it, and she did not look at her brother as she passed him. She stood beside Maren, this woman who had wept for appearances 12 days ago, and she said in a voice that did not shake, "My father was unconscious the week that document is dated. My brother guided his hand. I was in the room. I'll swear to it anywhere you need me to. A courtroom, a deposition, anywhere." Grady came off the back wall. "Sloan!" Her name came out of him like a man grabbing for a rope. "Don't! You don't know what you're—" "I know exactly what I'm doing." She finally looked at him, and there was grief in it, and there was no give in it at all. "I've known for 2 weeks. I've known since the room smelled like that hospital, and you handed me a pen and asked me to remember it differently. I'm done being your alibi, Grady. I'd rather lose a brother honestly than keep one this way." Royce Caldwell, who had spent his whole life knowing the precise moment to leave a room set his portfolio under his arm, and stepped quietly toward the door. He understood arithmetic, too. A forged document with a witness, a bought vote with a crying child at the center of it, a dying man who had risen from his sickbed to call it theft in front of the whole town. There was no version of this that ended with Lakemont's name on the shoreline, and he was not a man who stayed for the part where the bill came due. "Mr. Caldwell," Maren said, and he stopped at the door. "When you get back to Seneca, take a walk down to the gate. Look at the water nobody can reach." She let it sit. "That's the last thing your company will build on a lake I have anything to say about." He left without answering. And then the thing happened that Maren had not planned for, the thing that decided it. Roy Tamblyn, watching his patron walk out the door, watching the room turn, did the arithmetic himself and saw that the only person left holding the forgery was Grady Vaughn, and that a witnessed forgery was a prison word, and that he, Roy, had been going door to door doing the dirty work of a crime he could be charged alongside. "I didn't know about any document," Roy said too loud to the room to quinn to anyone. "Whatever the Vaughn kid did with his father's will, that's between him and the law. I was told the sale was clean. I was told the widow was selling. That's all I knew." He was backing away from Grady now, physically, his chair scraping. "I never touched a will." "You touched my kitchen table," Bertie's father said, standing his cap finally still in his hands. It was the first thing the thin, worried man had said all afternoon, and it carried. "You touched my daughter's future. I don't much care what you knew about a will." Grady stood alone in the middle of the room, his patron gone, his hired man scrambling to save himself, his sister beside his stepmother, the truth laid out on a scarred table in front of 60 people who had known his father longer than they had known him. He had the look of a man who has just understood that the deadline he set for someone else has come due for him instead. Quinn Easton closed the matter with the flat calm of a person who has been waiting a long time to say the words. "The challenge to Mrs. Whitfield's standing rests entirely on the estate revision," she said. "I will be filing to have that document examined by the county, along with a sworn statement from Sloan Vaughn and the witness testimony of Owen Ashby. I'd suggest, Mr. Vaughn, that you speak to a lawyer of your own before this goes any further. You're going to need one. And Mr. Tamblyn," she added not unkindly, "I'd suggest you stop talking. Every word you've said in the last 2 minutes is a word you'll wish back." She looked around the ring. "I don't think we need a vote today, but if anyone wants one, I'll take it." No one called for a vote. The matter was already decided not by a count of shares, but by a room full of people who had watched a stranger choose them over a comfortable check, and a frightened girl tell the truth, and a sister choose her dead father over her living brother, and 2 old men keep a promise they had made before any of it had a name. Grady left alone. The SUV was already gone, Caldwell with it. He walked out into the gray afternoon and down the road toward town on foot, his navy coat too thin for the cold he had never had to live in, and Maren watched him go through the front window of the market and felt no triumph in it, only the quiet sorrow of a thing that could have been otherwise in a man who had chosen otherwise. He was Hollis's son. Some part of her would always be sorry for the father who had not lived to see how that turned out, and sorrier still that the last act of that father's life had given his son the chance to become this. The county examined the document in the weeks that followed. Sloan gave her statement and did not waver. Roy Tamblyn, in the end, was not charged with the forgery because he had not committed it, but the pledges he had gathered evaporated overnight, and the people whose kitchens he had sat in stopped returning his calls, and a man who trades only in confidence discovers quickly that he has nothing once the confidence is gone. He sold his own small share back to the trust before spring and moved south though, and the town let him go the way a body lets go of a splinter. The ice did not break all at once. It gave way slowly through the back half of February and into March in patient seams that widened under the lengthening light, dark water opening first along the reeds. By the time the trust held its first ordinary meeting of the spring, the cold had loosened its grip on the ground, and the shoreline had begun to breathe again. They brought back the winter gathering before the season turned on a clear Saturday evening, when the ice was still thick enough to trust. Glass jars with candles lined the shore, their light pooling soft across the frozen surface. A fire pit cracked near the dock. Della ladled soup into paper bowls, and Arnie stood near the marina, shaking hands with people he had known his whole life. And somebody brought a guitar and played something simple and old. And for a while, the only sound on the lake was laughter and a single instrument, and the low, contented murmur of a town that had nearly lost something and had not. Bertie Olson tied a strip of blue ribbon around Tucker's collar and declared him Dock Patrol, and he bore it with the patient dignity of a working dog who has decided a child may do as she likes. Her father came and shook Maren's hand and could not find the words and did not need them. Owen Ashby came wrapped in 3 blankets in a chair by the fire, the tank at his side, and he did not say much, but he watched the lanterns on the ice with an expression Maren had seen only once before in a photograph of a young man on this same shore. And when she brought him a bowl of soup, he caught her wrist for a moment and held it, and that was all the thanks either of them needed. Sloane came too. She had stayed in the north through the worst of it, and she stood a little apart at first, unsure of her welcome in a town her brother had tried to sell, until Maren crossed to her through the lantern light and put an arm around her and turned her toward the fire, and that settled it. Whatever Maren had failed to be to those children for 22 years, she found she could be something to one of them now, late but not too late. Quinn nudged her gently. "Say something," she said. "They'll want to hear from the chair." The chair. The title had surprised Maren when it was offered the week before, and she had not sought it, but no one else had either. And Arn had simply looked at her across the table and said, "You're already doing the work." She stepped toward the fire, and the faces turned to her lit gold, some she knew by name now, and some she was still learning. "Thank you for coming," she said. Her voice carried farther than she expected over the still water. "This lake means something to all of us, and it's worth protecting." She paused, and that was nearly all she had planned, but one more thing came to her looking out at the candles burning on the ice. "My husband believed a place like this only stays itself if somebody decides to stay with it. He stayed, quietly, for years. He never told me, and I spent 2 weeks angry at him for it, and I think I'll be a little angry at him for the rest of my life." A few of the older faces smiled the way people smile when a widow tells the truth about her marriage instead of a story about it. "But he left me the keys and a good dog to find them, and all of you. I didn't know him as well as I thought I did. I'm getting to know him now a little every day I keep what he kept." She found Bertie's face and Owen's and Sloane's. "I'm not going anywhere, you should know that. Whatever comes. And something always comes, you'll find me right here." The crowd murmured, and somebody clapped, and then everybody did not loud the way quiet people clap for a quiet thing they mean. And Maren stepped back from the fire and let the night carry on without her at its center, which was where she preferred to be. Later, when the last of the lanterns had been carried home and the fire had burned down to embers, she walked out to the end of the dock with Tucker at her side. The boards were steady underfoot now. 2 boys from the apprenticeship program had reinforced them the week before, tightening bolts and replacing the warp planks, and Bertie had handed up the tools and called it her dock, and no one had argued. She sat down at the edge with her boots above the dark water, and Tucker lowered himself beside her front paws over the lip of the dock, his chin coming to rest against her knee. Across the lake, the loons called clean and certain in the cold. The hurt of that warm office in Milwaukee had not vanished. She did not expect it ever fully would, but it had changed the way the water below her had changed from something locked and silent into something open and moving and alive. She had driven north believing she'd been handed the smallest thing a man can leave a wife, a worthless cabin at the end of a forgotten road. She understood now that she had been handed the largest thing he had, the one piece of his life he could not put into words, and the trust that she would know what to do with it when she found it. He had not written her out. He had written her into the only part of himself he could not say out loud, and sealed it in a wall and left a good dog to lead her to it. She rested her hand in the thick fur at Tucker's neck. The blue ribbons still knotted there soft now with the warmth of the fire. "You and me," she said. He leaned into her, the way he had leaned into her in that office 12 days and a whole lifetime ago. And across the water, a final slab of ice tilted and cracked gently and slipped beneath the surface, and the lake closed over it and went still and clear and open the way water does when winter is finally finished with it. Sometimes what feels like being written out is only being moved somewhere else, not away, forward, and spring at long last had come to Alder Lake.